a good lunch. Before we begin the third session, let me once again thank our sponsors for this event: Platinum Partner TVS, Knowledge Partner Amity University Dubai, State Partner Uttar Pradesh Sarkar, Travel Partner Air India, State Partner Madhya Pradesh Government, Silver Partner Godrej Expert Rich Cream, Silver Partner General Insurance Council, Print Partner UAE Khalij Times, Print Partner India, The Hindu. And we're all set for the third session, the third round. This is the WION Global Summit. And now we'll talk about Pakistan. Balancing and recalibrating Pakistan's diplomatic strategy, economy, security, and internal stability. I'll once again welcome on stage Mr. Riz Khan, who's the moderator for this session.
हमारा आधी आबादी गुर्बत की लकीर या उससे नीचे, हम इसको ऊपर नहीं उठा सकते.
A crumbling economy, a challenging global image,
working productively with Pakistan to confront terrorists who operate on its soil.
Big promises, but perhaps misplaced priority.
प्लीज हमें जल्द से जल्द यहाँ से रेस्क्यू किया जाए.
पाकिस्तान गवर्नमेंट किस चीज का वेट कर रही है?
Pakistan has big diplomatic goals, wanting to strike a balance between China and the United States, but it needs to address problems at home. Islamabad has to address issues such as those in the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. Pakistan takes pride in its Muslim identity and needs to speak out on the plight of the Uyghur Muslims.
What's your stance on China's treatment of Uyghur Muslims?
Frankly, I don't know much about that.
In selling the narrative of peace, the government of Prime Minister Imran Khan has to tackle homegrown terror and take steps towards making the neighborhood safe. What steps can Pakistan take to show the right policy and diplomacy? Session 3. Balancing and recalibrating Pakistan's diplomatic strategy, economy, security, and political stability. The dialogue partners for this session are Khurshid Mahmood Kasuri, former Foreign Minister of Pakistan; Salman Bashir, former Foreign Secretary of Pakistan; Rehan Khan, journalist, commentator, and broadcaster.
I thought I was still wired up. Please, a round of applause for our panelists here. So I hope you had a good lunch. Now, of course, earlier we were discussing India's challenges and position on the geopolitical stage. And of course, how can we have a broader discussion about South Asia unless we look at the situation for Pakistan too? So I'm very honored to have our distinguished panel join us here. Diplomacy is a difficult language. You know, I had this experience with Desmond Tutu, Archbishop Desmond Tutu of South Africa. He was on my show a few years ago, and I bumped into him at the United Nations in an elevator with his family. And I said, you know, Archbishop Tutu, you said one of the most diplomatic things I've ever heard. He said to me, what was that? Now, he was with his family, so I didn't impersonate him to himself, but he said on my show, thank God I am not God. Otherwise, I would have to say Osama bin Laden and George Bush are both my children. I said, that was very diplomatic, Archbishop Tutu. And he laughed. He said, yes, I wanted to make a point. I said, but you're not that diplomatic, apparently, when an interviewer discovered during the interview, when he was about to interview you, that it was your 50th wedding anniversary. And this journalist said, Archbishop Tutu, you've been married 50 years. That's a long time. In all those 50 years, have you ever contemplated divorce? And Archbishop Tutu said, divorce? Never. But murder? So diplomacy even slips away from those we admire as being diplomatic. So I know this is going to be a fiery session, and I think that's expected from our guests too. Very honored to have them up here. And of course, you know, you're in a difficult position because a lot of the things that are being discussed are the challenges that Pakistan is facing, and some of those were raised on the video prior to. So perhaps the former Foreign Minister of Pakistan, Khurshid Mahmood Kasuri, I'll start with you, sir, and ask you, what do you see to be the biggest challenge that Pakistan faces right now?
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank the organizers of the event.
You have to hold it a bit closer, that's all.
Is it all right?
Yeah, it's all right. You just have to hold it closer, yeah.
For inviting us here. But I'd like to break away, if I may, from some of the questions that you have in mind. And this is because I heard the speeches of my distinguished friends from India this morning. And unless I take note of that, you see, we all seem to live in an echo chamber. We only hear each other. If this conference was being held in Islamabad, and if there were international guests, not just Indian Pakistanis, they'd be saying things that are completely different. And that's why I compliment the organizers of the conference. It's a huge challenge. We think differently. In fact, in most of the things that were said here, I think in exactly the opposite manner. Exactly the opposite. It's not that there are differences, but that doesn't resolve. That's the whole issue. When you have differences of this nature, that is when diplomacy comes in. I have not given up hope. Why? I think it was Dean Acheson who wrote a book, Present at Creation. Because he was present when the new structure after the Second World War was being created. I was present when we came almost to resolving the issue of Jammu and Kashmir. And when I say that, no Indian who have ever been in a position to contradict me has done so. In fact, in recent years, the former Foreign Secretary, the former National Security Advisor, Shiv Shankar Menon, and probably last year, the back channel negotiator, Mr. Lamba, was asked a straight question by an Indian magazine. It was 2 years ago. I've got all the dates and all. If somebody wants, I'll give them after this. Kasuri Saab keeps on saying that they were near a resolution of Jammu and Kashmir. He says, I think he's right. He said it without a pause. And Shiv Shankar Menon, and they've all said the same thing. So, having stated that we live in our echo chambers, that we think differently, we have no options, as Vajpayee said. Prime Minister Vajpayee was a wise man. He said, you can change your friends, but not your neighbors. We are condemned to live with each other. How shall we live? That is the challenge.
But that's not the best perspective. We're condemned to live with each other. I think maybe you could be more diplomatic there.
Because there's so much of negativity in South Asia.
Understood.
That's why I used the word.
Just a quick follow-up then. Why do you think things have drifted so far now? If you were so close at one stage, why have things drifted so far?
Why have?
Things drifted so far apart now.
That is a very unfortunate thing. In August 2006, we received a message from former Prime Minister Manmohan Singh. When you go to Delhi, or most of them will go back to Delhi, they can ask Prime Minister Manmohan Singh what I'm telling you now. When I went to see him, he had lots of books, but the most prominent book on his table was mine. I was quite pleased, because he said to some Indian, "Inhone to sab sach likh diya." They didn't expect Foreign Minister of Pakistan to be speaking the entire truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So he put the book, and he actually, you ask him, in 2006 August, we had invited him to Islamabad to come and sign the agreement on Sir Creek, and 90% of the issue in Jammu and Kashmir has been resolved. The idea was that since people continue to say that Pakistan and India cannot resolve each other bilaterally, you have to bring in either the World Bank on Indus Basin, or to bring in a tribunal in the run of Kutch. We wanted to prove that they were wrong. We could do things bilaterally. That was a challenge. So he was going to come in August 2006. Then he said, as usual, India is a huge country, there are some election or the other, 6 elections including those of UP were being held. He said, could you postpone the date? Our misfortune was that we said to him, okay, March. I wish we had said to him November, December, January. March is when President Musharraf decided to take on the Chief Justice of Pakistan, and all hell let loose. Okay. Otherwise, the issue was very near a resolution.
All right, so I'm going to come back to you on that in a minute. I'm going to bring in Raham Khan here as well. You know Pakistani politics from the inside. every country has messy politics. Literally, every country has it. What would you say is particularly unusual about Pakistan's politics from your perspective?
I think quite the obvious that we've had a very checkered history when it comes to democracy. And I think that across the world now, I see with a lot of pain and a lot of anguish that actually the democratic voice is completely lost. So it's not only true for Pakistan now, we've seen that across the world. We see a very dictatorial approach, be it in the US or the UK, but particularly for our neighbors. I see all the happenings in Delhi recently with the Citizenship Amendment Act, the lynching in broad daylight of Muslim citizens of Delhi, the Article 370 abrogation of that without taking the Indian Parliament into confidence. So you see, the challenges that Pakistan has faced for the last over 72 years, I fear that those concerns, I have similar concerns about India now. And why we're concerned is because when you suppress the democratic voice, when you suppress dissenting voices, when there is fascism, you are bound to create more chaos and instability in the region. So I think what was unusual about Pakistan is not unusual anymore, because we see the pattern being repeated in India, we see the pattern being repeated in other countries, and I think that there has to be a space created for moderate, sensible voices who disregard jingoism, who disregard democracy and democratic values. So I think that's what's unusual about Pakistan. But in recent times, I think where there has been an increase of, shall we say, dictatorship in Pakistan or a sham democracy, we've also seen the rise of sensible voices. I think that we have to give credit to Pakistani voices, particularly those in the opposition and those in civil society, for actually showing a lot of sensibility. And I must also point out, because our military, of course, gets a lot of flack, but I think that in recent times, post-Pulwama, post the attack in Balakot, post-Kashmir, even the Citizenship Amendment Act, I think that one must, and I'm not a fan of the government at the moment in Pakistan, but I would say that the military has shown restraint. I think that if there has been a positive step made towards peace and perhaps a milder approach that has been shown by Pakistan, it must be appreciated.
Okay. Salman Bashir, sir, you're the former Foreign Secretary of Pakistan. Do you feel, listening to what has already been said, that things have drifted far apart, that we've lost a time where there were sensible voices, as Reham has indicated?
Well, I think definitely. I think we have lost a lot of time, actually, plus 70 years. Having said that, and having seen the situation, and I believe everybody knows where we are, things have regressed very steeply, very deeply, and the misunderstandings have been blown, to a certain extent. But having said that, as Foreign Minister Kasuri Saab said, he personally invested a lot in peace, in the efforts towards peace. I think, speaking of Pakistan, of the Parliament of Pakistan, of the governments, the present and the past, and having worked and interacted with the parliaments and the political system in Pakistan, I can say with a lot of confidence that we have always been very keen to have good neighborly relations with India. Now, the question basically is, how do you start in the present situation? And I think what is glaringly absent at this point in time, at least that is how we see it from Islamabad's perspective, is the political will in Delhi. Because somehow the Pakistan factor has been very much a part of domestic politics. We have seen that run up to the re-election of the present government, and it is being sort of perpetuated, as Reham said, internally in terms of the actions that the BJP government has taken. It has certain popular appeal, courtesy of the media. So I think it is time for the countries of South Asia, and especially India, now to, break this pattern. You cannot be a great power, leading power in the world if you have running problems with your smaller neighbors. So it is time, I think, to sort of, take a break and see what can be done.
And I'll come round back to that, but I'll bring in Mr. Kasuri again. Has Pakistan lost a friend in America? President Trump seems very cozy now with Prime Minister Modi.
Yes, I think the relationship with the United States had taken a nosedive in 2011. And that is the measure that I use to judge how much improvement there has been. They killed our soldiers, aerial bombing. They said it was a mistake. We stopped their route for 6 months. We said that will not be opened unless you apologize. Then Secretary Clinton apologized, and it was opened. Raymond Davis, an American CIA agent, was arrested. He was sent to prison, and the relation took a further nosedive. So many things happened in 2011 that can be called the most horrible year in our relation. Now look at the situation. I think President Trump has said about 8 or 10 times that he's prepared to facilitate, to be a whatever between Pakistan and India, to act as not an arbitrator, to mediate in Pakistan and India, despite the fact that he knows that India will not accept mediation. He continues to say that. There must be some method to that madness. He's not known to be mad. He may be known to be reckless, but he's not known to be mad.
Do you believe he would be a fair mediator?
Sorry?
Do you believe President Trump would be a fair mediator either way?
Well, let me put it like this. There are only 2 countries really who can play any role. Only 2 countries. China, India will not accept. China, I say, because it's our common neighbor. United States, despite the fact that there's a definite tilt towards India, it's a strategic partner. In fact, they continue to repeat it every day that they are strategic partners. And this morning we heard the General Secretary of the BJP repeat that they are strategic partners. Despite that, as not 2-3 years ago, a book was written in which precisely this issue was taken, that United States and Pakistan were embroiled in an embrace that they could not escape. It said no exit from Pakistan. And I've forgotten the name, the author will come back. Now the point is, why? And he goes on to mention 3 or 4 reasons. Pakistan's own size, maybe smaller than India's, but it's one of the 5 or 6 countries in the world. Pakistan army, one of the 5 or 6 important armies in the world. The only Muslim nuclear power. Then Pakistan's relationship with China and India. 2 countries which feature very importantly on United States diplomatic radar. So I feel and then with the role we played in Afghanistan, President Trump and everybody has been praising that role. So there is no reason for me to believe that the situation in the United States is much improved.
Okay. Reham, let's get your perspective on this, please.
I respectfully disagree with that. I think the minute that I saw Trump sit across the Prime Minister of Pakistan and say that he wanted to be a mediator in an issue which I think that was the beginning of where it all went wrong. I think that if anybody can mediate, it would have to be China, purely because if you look at the past track record, we've not seen every single time, and this is on record, every single time that India and Pakistan have had any issue on territorial disputes or Kashmir, China has stayed neutral. Even though we regard China in Pakistan as all-weather friend, but they have shown restraint throughout our history, where China has not become involved in India and Pakistan disputes, particularly recently, last year we saw as well. I also fear that Pakistan for a very long time has been blamed for extremism, and we've been called all sorts of things like the epicenter of terrorism, and we've had this crackdown on militant organizations, and we've had a lot of demands being put on us by America to say, even going as far as do more, whereas I think people forget that the beginning of all of this militant organizations and all of this jihadi element was planted by the US in Pakistan. So I feel that's quite hypocritical of them to suggest. But what I fear now is that although we have been given an image of being the epicenter of terrorism and militant and extremist views, but I see that being mimicked in India. And I feel that the US is not only turning a blind eye, possibly even encouraging this militancy and extremism. So if Islamic extremism was wrong, how can you say that Hindu extremism is correct? It cannot be correct. And I fear that that is the pattern of behavior in India now, and we don't want India, in all fairness. I'm not a government spokesperson, and I'm not here to defend the government or the military, but I do think that India must be very cautious about going down the route of extremism, because Pakistan has suffered, and we would not want further instability and chaos with one new brand of extremism from India in the region.
Raham, thank you. So I'm going to expand on this idea, though, also with Mr. Bashir, and ask, to what degree have the economics of the global stage changed to the degree where the politics are being pushed aside by economic considerations? Mr. Trump has a lot to gain economically, of course. China's in a totally different place from, say, 20 years ago. How much are economics dominating the way the politics are shifting?
Well, I think, we thought that economics was a big factor. India is a big market, so of course India has a certain appeal for people, all over the world, which we recognize and which is not necessarily a bad thing, actually. Pakistan itself is a market of about 200 million plus. So yes, economics should be the uppermost factor in politics. But unfortunately, following what has been said, I think if you take a view, 30,000 feet view of the situation in South Asia, I think we have the proclivity now to fall victim to geopolitics. The American position, globally speaking, and more specifically in our part of the world, as they say, the concept of the Indo-Pacific, but as applied to South Asia and Afghanistan, I think it is from the geopolitical prism, that is the China factor, that the US is viewing this region. They have not been sensitive to the differences or the possibilities and the opportunities within that region. I've said to my American friends that you ought to at least come up with some sort of a vision statement that you have for South Asia. Also in the larger context of Indo-Pacific. But unfortunately, I think the states of South Asia, who were all members of SAARC, they have lost their own ability and the capacity to put together such a vision for the future. I think that's where one should be focused on, at least at the leadership level, to see what we really want. And the fact is that, there are troubles everywhere globally. What has happened is that the political systems and the economic systems have become sort of dysfunctional. And that applies also to our part of the world. So there are ongoing challenges, and those challenges basically are arising from societal changes and challenges which are being propelled again by globalization, technology, and demography, basically.
Mr. Kasuri, we've seen progress sometimes in the past. There's been cricket diplomacy, there's been openness in some areas. There's a lot of cultural integrity often with sharing of, music and art and stuff. What do you see as are the positive areas that the two countries could look at in order to try to at least start to build bridges, even if the politics are quite far apart?
I was so hard-pressed when I was coming here to find some areas, considering the current state of relations, that I was reminded that when Napoleon Bonaparte defeated Emperor Francis II, Austria-Hungary, the best way to bridge the trust deficit was to arrange a marriage between the emperor's daughter, Marie-Louise, and Napoleon Bonaparte. So I started looking around, were there any possible bachelors or...
I don't know if marriage diplomacy has ever been on the cards.
Only two. Rahul Gandhi in India, Bilawal Bhutto in Pakistan. Now Rahul, I've even found a match because he's been, probably not very successful so far. And I thought a Rajput chieftain's daughter in Umarkot in Tharparkar, where Akbar was born, that might be the right place. So we could look, that may be one. Because if you want to cut corners, you'll have to try harder for Bilawal Bhutto. Now, on a more serious note, on a more serious note, I would suggest take baby steps, because I've been through it all. The current state of relations is so pathetic. Is the only word. It may be an undiplomatic word. The sort of language that is being used by Delhi and Islamabad about each other, I've never heard it before. That tells you the state of our relations. So those are the baby steps. So let's go baby steps. We've been through composite dialogue. We've been through comprehensive dialogue. We have no options, by the way, to come without a dialogue, because there's no way you can resolve. So the baby steps are as follows. Number one, there's going to be a Shanghai Cooperation Organization meeting in Delhi. Pakistan will be invited because it's a member. I doubt very strongly that Prime Minister Imran Khan will go. It will be a big political risk. But if India were to create a more congenial atmosphere, maybe Pakistan will not boycott and send its foreign minister. So baby step would be to see that something is done, the situation doesn't deteriorate further, and at the foreign ministers' conference, what is the other baby step? The most non-controversial is religious tourism. You saw how popular Kartarpur corridor was. When I was foreign minister, I invited Mr. Advani to perform we had restored Katas Raj temple in near Islamabad, and it's about 50 minutes drive from Islamabad. And then there is the very famous temple in Balochistan. And then, of course, the Muslims could be allowed to visit shrines, Hazrat Imamuddin Awliya and Ajmer Sharif. Now, this is not controversial. So, if you were to allow these baby steps, allow group religious tourism, that may perhaps, given the state of current bad relations, be then a very important step. You continue to ask me, why was President Trump? Can he play? I said, why does he repeat? You see, what happens is, he repeats to please Pakistanis, but it also displeases the Indians. So we are very happy that he repeats it, because we want something to be done about Kashmir, and I'd be happy if he repeats it 10 times more. But perhaps what would make more impression on India is either Trump or the British leadership or Europeans like Chancellor Merkel or President Macron were to also play a role behind the scenes. How do I know? The first call that I received was from Colin Powell. He said to me, Khurshid, you'll soon hear good news, be prepared to receive it. I said, what will happen? Next day, Mr. Vajpayee extended his famous hand of friendship to Pakistan, and we were ready. We immediately invited him to Pakistan. So a major world power should play a role behind the scenes. Fourth baby step, businessmen. Forget the commerce secretaries, they're not going to meet because the governments are not talking. But why is the government of India refusing visas to private businessmen? I don't understand. we give visas. So I think these are the baby steps.
Okay. Thanks. I was intrigued by your marriage diplomacy and then your use of baby steps afterwards. I think that's almost guaranteed.
I quite like Kusuri Saab's idea. I think he's suggesting a modern version of Veer Zara, and I believe Modi ji is single. So that's certainly a possibility. But yes, the baby steps did unnerve me as well. I was thinking of some cross-border IVF here. But I think I agree with the baby steps idea. I agree with the proposal idea also. But I think that baby steps even further down, say not even the foreign minister. I think one of the biggest mistakes we've done with vis-a-vis India-Pakistan relationship has been that it's always been very high profile. So I think it doesn't have to be at a prime ministerial level. It doesn't even have to be at the foreign ministry level. I do not agree with cosmetic steps like music and films and art. And I think I also believe that artists of either side should not be dragged into the politics. I think it's unfair to them.
But do they have to be dragged into politics? They could just simply sharing.
I don't think that they should be used as mouthpieces, is what I meant, to be more specific. I think art should not be involved in this. This is far serious business, and I think that the baby steps would include maybe not only business to business, but I think at a lower level connection on trade and commerce. And I think that what America is doing now is, we've seen in the last couple of months, it's replaced China and has become the biggest trading partner with India now. And I think the US is using that economic route. It is natural for us to use the economic route, because although all roads might go to China, but all roads go via Pakistan. So I think that we need to understand the strategic importance of Pakistan as a transit country, and I think that it makes more sense to be building trade relationships, genuine trade relationships between Pakistan, India, Afghanistan, Kazakhstan, and China, than to be sort of, building relationships with the US. I think that's where I see that with a lot of concern.
Riham, a quick follow-up on this. As someone who lives in London, I grew up in London. I was born in Yemen, grew up in London, have family on both sides of the border. I consider myself a Ukasian. And I grew up with Indians, Pakistanis, everyone. And we never considered religion or background. We consider ourselves united. What role can expats play in trying to bridge the gap?
I was born in Libya, and I was raised in Peshawar during the Afghan war, and then in the UK for much of my life. I've just recently been living near London, and I think that the role of the expats has been, I speak as a former overseas Pakistani, unfamiliar with Pakistani politics, and I do think that expats, particularly those from a Pakistani origin, are detached, so they don't really know what's going on the ground. And one of the reasons where I wrote the book as well was because I felt it was important to educate people to know what is the realities, to sift between the propaganda and what the reality of politics is in Pakistan. So we were sold, obviously, the propaganda theory of what's good in Pakistan and what's not. Expats, I think, particularly now, can play a very active role. With the Citizenship Amendment Act, we've had a lot of pressure on our Pakistani origin politicians, and we've seen the MP for Peribar, Khalid Mahmood, who's the first Muslim parliamentarian, also raise this issue in Parliament, and the UK Parliament condemning the Citizenship Amendment Act, and also the passive role of the police with the rioting in Delhi. And I think that's a positive role. I think we need to move away from propaganda, and we need to move towards building relationships. Like you said, we live in the UK, and we have very good relationships with our Sikh brethren. I've been very closely associated with my work for several years. I'm very fond of the Smetic Gurdwara and the food there, and I've just been offered a visit to the Gurdwara in Dubai as well, but with the Hindus as well. And I do not understand why we can live in perfect harmony, attend each other's weddings, have no problem with our faith or our belief system in the UK. It was the same in Libya. I grew up around people from different nationalities and different faiths. Why do we have to do that? Because the politics at home drags us into it, and we watch, I fear that Indians watch only Indian television channels. There's a lot of jingoism there at the moment, and Pakistanis only watch the Pakistani channels, and Right now, it's not a great idea to be watching Pakistani channels because there's not much you can say which is based on honesty. So I think that expats need to perhaps even travel, but also not be blinded by propaganda. We need to rebuild. The way forward for Pakistan and India is economic. We have an emerging economic power in the shape of India, and we talk about Pakistani economy crumbling in the last 16, 17 months, but look at India. You know, pre-Article 370, one of the biggest successes was the revenue, the GDP in Kashmir, in India. But what did we see? We see that plummeting. We see a decline in car manufacturing in Pakistan. We see a decline in car manufacturing in India. So certainly the way out is economic, and we must collaborate on that.
I want to get Salman Bashir's view on the idea of the baby steps that Kasuri Saab was mentioning, about especially the idea that businesses can work closer together.
Yes, Reza, I think that's also what Riham has said. Trade, businesses, economic cooperation, certainly. In fact, one of the things that I often boast about is when I was High Commissioner to India, we nearly got the trade normalization done. It's another thing, it's not actually been translated into the implementation side. Baby steps, yes. But I think, to give you my honest view, nothing is going to work. No dialogue, no back channel, unless the Indian government takes steps to ease the situation in Jammu and Kashmir. That is absolutely the bottom line. Kasuri Saab mentioned the possibility of the Foreign Minister of Pakistan attending the SCO in Delhi. Well, certainly, but I think bilaterally, there is not any scope left for Pakistan, even in diplomatic terms, unless the situation in Jammu and Kashmir, the repression is eased. I think that's the, but fine. But having said that, the situation as it is a problem at the moment, more, of course, for the Kashmiris and for India. But having said all this, let me just go back to something on the positive side. You know, these 70 years, we have reached understandings and agreements which are quite substantive. So if there is the political will, all of this can be brought forward, which means not only tourism of the type that was mentioned by Kasuri Saab, but also we have a visa liberalization agreement that was signed 2013. It's not been implemented. There is the whole area of humanitarian aspects, concerning especially those in prison in both countries. There are agreed recommendations of the Judiciary Committee, which can just be picked up and implemented. So if you ease travels, then, of course, most important, the 2003 understanding on respect for the ceasefire on the line of control. We need to have some sort of, sanity prevail and restore respect for the ceasefire. And that will be a very positive step on which other things could be built. And then leading, of course, to a bigger step, that is trade normalization. I think that is also, that was agreed. And then we deal with the differences and the disputes. Mm-hmm. And it can be done if there is this political will, if it's demonstrated tangibly.
So, Mr. Kasuri, one thing we've seen at a global level is the breaking down of institutions, in the sense that the pacts that formed the various organizations seem to be building walls within, and there's more nationalization, more populism taking place. How much does that harm the situation in South Asia, in your opinion?
Thank you. I'll answer. But I'm grateful to the former Foreign Secretary for clarifying one thing which I had stated. I had said that I hope India would take steps to enable Pakistani participation, admittedly at a lower level. And that is what I had in mind. that something should be done to ease the pain of the Kashmiris. Because otherwise it will not be possible, although Pakistan would like to attend Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Coming to the, the situation of various, let's start with SAARC. Now, I was a great believer in SAARC. And I'll tell you one thing which most people had not noticed, which I had. And that was the sheer volume of meetings, with India and Pakistan, between the countries of SAARC, various officials from SAARC countries. I had once calculated that in 1 year it was more than 200. Now, this creates a new dynamic. Forget the progress that's being made in every area. We are humans. It makes a lot of difference, the personal touch. That, and furthermore, it never ceases to amaze me. India is the biggest power in South Asia. Pakistan is probably the second biggest power. Now, we are not prepared to meet each other in SAARC, but we will meet each other in SCO, where Russia and China are calling the shots. That's again very amazing. In an area where we can set the terms, we are not prepared to meet. We will meet. We are even prepared to take part in military operations under the auspices of SAARC, which Pakistani and Indian troops have done. So, yes, it's creating a problem as far as connectivity is concerned. My dream, as a Pakistani, Pakistan's strategic situation, the great dream when I was foreign minister was connectivity. India, as foreign minister, prime minister, in fact, Manmohan Singh said, lunch somewhere, breakfast somewhere, lunch somewhere, dinner somewhere. I would actually say that I had in mind that the connectivity should be India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, China, and through CPAC, to which India now objects, the whole of this region can be actually connected. Without connectivity, European Union, you see, these days, name of the game is connectivity. If you do not have connectivity, so I think you hit the nail on the head, that if you're going to destroy connectivity, you're actually going to keep yourself backwards. Now, isn't it amazing that China has become the chief spokesman of globalization? They've understood the advantage of a huge market. And I think we should learn from that. And it's really, I was so sad. It was so, and I was unhappy to read the World Bank report, which said that we have a pathetic trade between Pakistan and India. They said the potential currently is $47 billion between the two countries. So first I got a shock. Then I said, why, what's so surprising? It was one market. It was all one market, and we traded with each other. So 47 billion is the figure the World Bank worked out.
So, Rehan, one of the things that has occurred in more than 70 years of tensions and disruption and conflict is that there must be younger generations becoming quite disillusioned with politics. Well, I think we are discussing that. So, okay, so
let me.
No. So this.
I can link Please. To that, and I'm glad that you've pointed it out. But I think that as many would realize, that part of a good interview or discussion is not to be only asking questions, but to be leading from the answers, and it is a developing discussion. So I think that that's what Riz is trying to do. But in response to what Kasuri Saab has said, actually even going further, you see, resetting Pakistan's or recalibration is very difficult. Again, I'm not a spokesperson for the Pakistani government or the military, but you cannot imagine the sort of pressure Pakistani government, the foreign ministry, the foreign office has when Kashmir is raised, wherever it's raised. Hear me out. So we have seen in the past.
Ladies and gents, please show some respect. Please show some respect and let the conversation continue.
In several years, we have seen the previous governments, particularly Mia Mohammad Nawaz Sharif, being labelled things like Modi ka yaar, because every single time there has been political will in Pakistan, we have had to live with labelling in Pakistan of being over-friendly. Now, in the last 17 months, actually, the Prime Minister of Pakistan has faced a lot of resentment, criticism from the opposition, from the public, because Kashmir is a very emotive subject in Pakistan. It might be emotive for you, but from Pakistani point of view, internal politics and the foreign ministry cannot, it puts the foreign ministry and the government in a very difficult position when you have situations like the Article 370 and the Citizenship Amendment Act to then talk about recalibrating. So diplomacy has been made very difficult for Pakistan. The way forward, as Mr. Kasuri was saying, was I think even the reservations that India has about the CPEC, the One Belt, One Road, particularly the going through Pakistan. In Pakistan, we have mixed feelings about CPEC also. And in the last year, this past government, we've seen some of the activity on CPEC actually go into cold storage, something which is obviously not liked by some quarters also. I think the way forward would be to focus on things like TAPI, the gas pipeline, because I think breakfast in one city and dinner in another would be only possible if there's breakfast in Delhi and breakfast in Lahore. And right now, our region is energy starved. And this is one of the things which could reset and recalibrate our position also, where India and Pakistan, and I think the US would be very happy to promote this as well. But there have been so many snags with the TAPI gas pipeline. I mean, that's 33 billion cubic meters of gas that we really need. And what better way of connectivity than to give energy to our region?
Well, my question to you actually, Rehan, was going to be about how can a country's politics recalibrate and reset if after 70 years of conflict and tension, the younger generation feels that the politicians are of a certain generation and entrenched in their views. How does it affect the next generation coming up that might be looking to do things differently in a country?
Actually, that's a very important question because, again, I've been running a mentor program for for the youth in universities in Pakistan, and I feel that actually things are going perhaps downhill. And the reason is there is a selfie wannabe politician culture now, where you think that you can be snapped with a politician and then rise up to the echelons of power, and it works. That's not the way forward for Pakistani politics. I see that this is much worse than the electables of past years. At least they had some experience. And I'm sure Kasuri Saab and Salman Saab as well will see some of these parliamentarians and those who associate in political parties across the board. I'm sure it has been a trend set by the Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf, the PTI, because it was, attracted a lot of youth. But I see that being replicated in other parties as well. It's a sad trend. Genuine leadership, genuine political student workers, genuine party workership, that sort of ethos is completely lost in Pakistan. And I think there is a cult following, again, initiated by PTI, but now being replicated in other parties. And I really must say that every time we see someone raise any point in Parliament or even in press conferences, it's really encouraging. Bilawal Bhutto in recent times, it's been very encouraging to see him speak very clearly and very courageously in Parliament. At least we see someone talk about issues in Parliament. It's sad that we didn't see Maryam Nawaz Sharif get a chance in Parliament. We would have liked to see where she stands with her political views. But I think political representation from constituencies is completely lost in Pakistan. It is, if you know someone, it's a sifarish culture in parties as well. And I've written extensively about this nepotism in the party structure as well. So I think we need to encourage student leadership in universities. We need to encourage a system of candidate selection very similar to the one we have in the UK, where you go through a board where there is limited nepotism, if any. And I think that is what we need. We really need to encourage young leadership. And in recent times in India and Pakistan, we've seen some of the most sensible voices come from women, young women in India and Pakistan. And young people in Pakistan. The Pashtun Tahaffuz movement, the liberal movement in Punjab, the Red movement. I think these are things that need to be encouraged.
So I'll just wrap up with Salman Bashir here on the idea. Can you see a young generation in Pakistan who might go into politics without baggage?
I think so, yes. I think in Pakistan, certainly, because I think for us, generally speaking, the nature of issues is changing. You know, today everybody, even irrespective of his stature or economic situation, is carrying a cell phone, you know, be it a gardener or peasant or, you know, so they are exposed to the world. I think their way of looking at themselves and their place in the country, in the society, and globally is very different from those of previous years. So definitely this generational change is something that is going to be a reality. Hopefully it will be good. Hopefully we will be able to see more clearly the commonalities, the common challenges, be it like the epidemics or the pandemics, or, you know, issues like climate change, of water, of drought, of pollution. These are all issues that need to be brought to the surface also in our internal political discussions. And certainly I think in terms of education and technology, Pakistani society, I see, is changing very fast, and sometimes we get an uneasy feeling because it's different than what it used to be. And I'm sure that's the case everywhere in India and globally. So the septuagenarians, etc., may still be in power in various capitals of the world, but their view of the world and their way of handling it is probably deficient because the challenges, the nature of challenges is different.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. A big round of applause for our panelists. Thank you.